Our chalice lighting this morning comes from Peggy Clark. Love brings us back to life. Easter is a holiday of miracles. It is life from death, joy from sorrow, celebration from mourning. Easter reminds us that all is never lost, that the story continues as long as we are here to tell it. So gather up your worries. We're going to bury them beneath the ground and watch them transform into flowers of hope, pushing through the earth, reminding us on Easter morning that love brings us back to life, calls us from sadness, from grief, from anxiety, into a world renewed and alive and filled with joy once again.
And when the morning has broken, we raise our voices in song. I want to invite you to rise in body or in spirit, to join the choir in our opening hymn, Morning Has Broken. The lyrics should be right there on the back wall. We're hopeful that the technology will comply. Please rise in body or in spirit. Welcome here to this sun-drenched place on this beautiful morning where we come to understand once again that there is love and power and amazement in this world that simply will not stay dead. Easter is about what rises up on the other side of suffering and of loss. It is about an irrepressible force that cannot be put entirely to rest, not even by the efforts of the mightiest empires or the strongest foes, not by apathy or guilt or grief or sorrow. In this way, the definitive power of Easter is not a vacant grave. It is a spirit-filled people. It is not an empty tomb. It is the carried away congregation called into new life, even now, on a morning like this one, in times such as these. Happy Easter, friends. May we seek and may we find a resurrection this morning of the Spirit within us, the Spirit among us, the Spirit beyond us, that calls us to new hope on this perfect morning after a good hard rain. Come, let us worship together.
Creatures of the earth and sky, come kindred, lift your voices high. Alleluia, alleluia, bright burning sun with golden beam, soft shining moon with silver gleam. Alleluia, 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 alleluia. Swift rushing winds so wild and strong, white stars that sail in heaven along. Alleluia, alleluia, alleluia. Praises morning, praises stars, evening fire, stars of evening. Alleluia, 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 alleluia. Flowing water pure and clear, make music for all life to hear. Alleluia, alleluia. Dance flame of fire so strong and bright, and bless us with your warmth and light. Alleluia, 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 alleluia,
I'd like to invite forward children, youth, people with limber knees, anyone who would like to join me to sit here while I tell us a perhaps familiar story. Come on up. And it's okay. You don't have to, but I promise it'll be pretty chill and not scary. Here you go. Hi, Abdisa. Hi, Malcolm. Hi, Josiah. So, are we going to have an Easter egg hunt? Yes, we are. And the Easter egg hunt is going to involve candy, and it does not start until I finish this story, and then we sing another song, and then you go do the Easter egg hunt. So I guess it would help if I told the story really fast.
Yes, yeah, it would. So let me eat the candy.
I cannot tell your parents to let you eat the candy because that would be interfering with the responsibility of your parents to manage your dietary problems and hopes. However, what I can do is tell you a very special story. You guys ready? All right. So, this is a story you've heard before. It's a story I've told before. It is a story that Hugh has heard me tell so many times. In this place, we tell stories about wonder and hope. And we tell stories that happen at particular times of the year, right? And I bet some of you will remember being here. Oops, I just put that on your head. I'm sorry. There we go. Some of you will remember being here at Christmas when we told a story about a little baby named Jesus. Probably it was Joshua, the son of Joseph, but whatever. We call him Jesus most of the time in these days. A story about a little baby named Jesus who was born at Easter, right? We told a story about how that little baby was born at Christmas. Thank you, Hugh. I told you, you'd heard the story many times, Hugh. About that little baby who was born, and he grew up to do some amazing things. Sometimes when we tell stories, we have big questions. We wonder big things. We wonder how the earth knows when to leave winter and turn into spring. We wonder how light comes from darkness. We wonder how we can be hopeful even when we felt really sad, right? And in this particular story, this baby who was born at Christmas, he grew up to be a man, whom we sometimes call Jesus, who talked about how people could have courage even when impossibly hard things were happening. Like even when there were impossibly powerful people telling them what to do, and not in a simple way, like telling them when to not eat candy, but like whether they could live and whether they could thrive and whether they could make their own choices. And so Jesus, when he grew up from that baby who was born at Christmas, he followed with his friends, and he told stories, and he taught people how to be brave, right? And what happened is that people started to follow him. You see all my people? There's my Jesus right there. And you see all the people that were following him? People started to follow him and to listen to what he was saying. And those people who followed him, they loved him. And it happened that that man named Jesus, he died when he was much, much, much too young. He died when he still had so much left to do in the world. And all the people who followed him were so profoundly sad. Can you imagine if the person you thought had all the answers just suddenly wasn't there anymore? That's what happened to the people who followed Jesus. His friends were so sad that they thought there was never going to be another good day again. Yeah, Malcolm?
How did he die?
How did he die? He died because the people who were in charge of the empire, this is the Roman Empire, thought that he and his friends were making trouble. They were making trouble. And so the empire decided that he had to die so he wouldn't make trouble anymore. There were soldiers, and there were people whose only job was to keep everybody very well behaved and very much in control. And when Jesus and his friends had the courage to ask if there could be another way to live, the Roman Empire said, no, we can't have that. And they killed him. In fact, they hung him up on a piece of wood until he died. It was very terrible and incredibly painful. And when that happened, Jesus' friends were so sad, and they took his body down off of that piece of wood that he had been hung on to die, and they put it inside a tomb. Anybody know what a tomb is? No?
Yes.
It's like a...
It's like a hole that sometimes they bury.
It's like a hole sometimes you bury people in. It's a special place that you would put a body, and they took his body down from that piece of wood that they had hung him on until he died, and they put it in this tomb, and they put a giant rock. Can you see my giant rock? It's rather precariously balanced, so it might fall down. They put a giant rock in front of the tomb. They said they rolled a stone so great in front of that tomb that no people could ever move it. And 2 days later, on the day that here, can you put these happy people around the tomb? Put those happy people out there. And here, put some hearts. 2 days later, on the day that we now call Easter, an amazing thing happened. Now, we don't know what really took place. We know how we tell stories about it. And the people have told this story for many, many years. They said that on that Sunday, Jesus' friends, including his friend Mary, came to the tomb. And what did they find? They found that great big stone, so heavy no one could ever move it alone, was rolled away. Somebody roll away my stone. Thank you, Josiah. And where the body of their friend had been, there was only an empty tomb. Where they thought they would see only sadness, they saw possibility. Because where they thought they would see the body of their friend, they saw nothing. Just the mere little hope that maybe the story didn't end with death. His friends said, "Where is he? What happened?" And the people found that somehow Jesus and the courage that he had lived with lived still in them, so that they could go live their own lives with greater courage too. And so when Jesus' friends walked away from that tomb and they saw possibility instead of just death, They lived every single day just a little more bravely, knowing that maybe just this once, the story doesn't have a sad ending. There is a mysterious truth that even the hardest things we can ever know don't always stay that way. Like even when you think you are the saddest you will ever be, sometimes it really does get better. The hardest things change, even when we don't expect it. From death to life, from sadness to joy, from hurt to forgiveness, from hatred to love, from winter to spring, and from all the things we think we lost to some things we might still find. We might not always know how this happens, but sometimes hope comes even when we have been so sad. And that is a miracle for Easter, that even when everything hurts, the way goes on and it gets better. So let's hope, that every sorrowful place has the stone rolled away and a reason once again for rejoicing. So as you go back to your seats, we're going to sing a song, This Little Light of Mine, which I think symbolizes what it means to go forward and believe that we still have more stories to tell, even when we've been so sad. Thank you, and thank you for correcting me that Jesus was indeed not born on Easter. Off you go. Our hymn is indeed This Little Light of Mine. Please rise in body or in spirit to sing it together and think on that courage that you carry away from the hard places.
And now we invite the youngest among us and any who is interested to go out to the plaza to meet Laura for the egg hunt. I think they want a little bit more time in the service, actually, as we bless them on their way. I'm going to go to the egg hunt. You can- Again, we gather in this world full of so many joys and concerns and sorrows and the things that make us what we are. Of course, gathering in this place not to escape or ignore, but to face fully in the fullness of who we are, in the complexities and the joys of this world. Today is Transgender Day of Visibility, and how fitting that it coincides with Easter this year. This day of transformation and awakening, this day of removing chains and coming back to life. How fitting it is to speak of miracles and of bearing witness in this day where there's so much legislation that's being put forth that aims to condemn and restrict the freedoms and rights of transgender, non-binary, gender non-conforming, two-spirited people, and so many who live beyond the binary. It is our duty to keep coming forward, to continue to use our voices to rise up in the face of this hate. And this is a day to celebrate and to see and to bear witness of the work and the wisdom, the ferocity and the vision, and the full lives and experiences of those among us that exist beyond the binaries. And not just for today by word and word alone, but all days by the action that we take in our lives, in our communities, and in our wider world. Also on our hearts and minds this morning is the disaster and the tragedy of the collapse of the Francis Scott Key Bridge early Tuesday morning in Baltimore. We lift our hearts to the families and the loved ones of all those lost and the many more that have been impacted, and for the city of Baltimore itself as it recovers and heals, with gratitude for the first responders and the search and rescue teams, and so much sorrow for the lives lost and the families forever changed. And finally, during this Holy Week, let us not forget the Holy Land, where so many are suffering and trapped in a living nightmare. Today, I offer key pieces of the statement that was released by the Office of the President of the UUA, Reverend Dr. Sophia Betancourt. This statement was written in good faith and conscience, rooted in our shared UU values of dignity, worth, and justice. These excerpts read, "There are crystallizing moments in the course of history when, in spite of the differences that exist among us, our common reverence for life demands that we speak with moral courage and clarity on the side of love. As people of faith and conviction, Unitarian Universalists share a belief that every human life is sacred, endowed with worth and dignity from the moment of birth, with no person more deserving of freedom and flourishing than any other. Our living tradition has long maintained that the only hells that exist are those that we create for one another here on earth. We are watching in real time as the people of Gaza exist in a human-made hell that grows more unimaginable every day. The medical infrastructure in Gaza has been decimated, with the continued prevention of humanitarian aid, including food and water, from reaching refugees. This terrifying moment calls all people of faith and conscience to do everything in our power to push our governments to interrupt genocide, address humanitarian crisis, avert multinational war, and weave just and lasting peace across the globe. We call upon Unitarian Universalists to open our hearts and be present to the depths of human suffering in this moment, not just by one group, but by people of many nationalities, identities, and religions. We commit to identifying and mitigating the evils of anti-Semitism, anti-Arabism, and Islamophobia in our own tradition, and to address their toxic legacies wherever we encounter them. We encourage all Unitarian Universalists to take action in solidarity, not only with global movements for ceasefire, but with liberatory, pro-democratic movements of all kinds that are working toward a future that contains the conditions of possibility for a true and enduring peace. You can read the full statement on the UUA website. But in these times where so many of us feel helpless and so many of us feel hopeless, we find strength in one another. We lead with our wisdom and we follow one another's wisdom and bravery in this tumultuous time and in all other times that impact human life on this world. We are at a precipice, a crisis of humanity. Let us look and face the truth in front of us and not turn away, but to hold to one another.
Our meditation this morning is a poem by Julia Esquivel, a Guatemalan poet, peace activist who has spent much of her life in exile from her country as a result of her work on behalf of the indigenous Mayan people. In this piece, she speaks of the life within the people, all the people, rising up always through every threat and every suffering, fixed there beyond memory, always keeping watch. She calls it, "They have threatened us with resurrection." There is something here within us which doesn't let us sleep, which doesn't let us rest, which doesn't stop pounding deep inside. It is fixed there beyond memory in the very pupil of our eyes, which during sleep, though closed, keep watch. What keeps us from sleeping is that they have threatened us with resurrection, because each nightfall, though exhausted from the endless inventory of pain, we continue to love life and do not accept more death. Accompany us then on this vigil, and you will know what it is to dream awake, to keep watch asleep, to live while dying, and to already know oneself here, now, always, resurrected to hope. Coming together as we do is a spiritual practice. Resurrection, I think, might be a spiritual practice. Giving in every way is a spiritual practice that sustains us even as we extend that time, that talent, and that treasure we have to offer out into the waiting world. And so in this time of offering, I invite you to both give and receive. In the giving, to know that you are a part of something larger than yourself, to receive the efficacy of your own power to shape this place that matters to you and the world. There are so many ways to give. I'll talk about our annual stewardship campaign later on. We'll get there at the end of the service, but for now, you know the drill. There is a box in the back. There are baskets that go around. You can text to give 73256 and the amount. You can always give online. This blessing is ours to share. What an honor it is to be one another's people in generosity and in love. There are miracle stories all over the place. There are miracle stories in literature and in faith, in politics and in society, and there are certainly miracle stories in sports. The turnaround that you never saw coming. The astonishment, they always say, came out of nowhere. But I suspect that every miracle has a backstory. Sometimes every miracle has a long and painful backstory, sometimes a traumatic one, or even a boring one. Sometimes a backstory that never gets told beneath the shining buzz of the miracle we have come to expect. Moreover, I suspect that every miracle has not only a backstory, but every single miracle has a rest of the story, what happens on the other side of all the wonders. Every miracle has a backstory, and every miracle has a rest of the story, neither of which, in the case of this morning's particular miracle, is all that easy to preach about in a Unitarian Universalist context. As I remind you nearly every Easter Sunday, we are generally not miracle literalists around here. And furthermore, no great fans of the whole concept of redemptive suffering either, nor of gods or nations who would require such suffering of those they love. It is a theologically complicated holiday, a deeply laden miracle we welcome on this bright and beautiful morning when the kids just want to find eggs. Which is why I think most of the time I have never really preached about either the backstory or the rest of the story of the miracle of Easter, what happens on either side of the resurrection. On this day, I usually leave the story at an empty tomb, marveling at that cavernous space where the people expected all their suffering to dwell. That usually is where I leave it. The stone rolled away, the women astonished, who walk away and tell no one, for they are full of awe and wonder and fear at what this miracle might bring. This space empty where they expected only sorrow to be. Sorrow, I say, because what could be more sorrowful than the backstory that precedes Easter morning? You saw me there when the kids were up, and wonderful little preacher that he is, Malcolm in kindergarten, asked me, how did they kill him? And you heard me trying to manage the horror of that backstory, didn't you? Trying not to give the entire arc of history of Roman execution, thousands upon thousands of people killed over all these years in the name of control, in the name of might, in the name of power, trying not to say how they broke his bones, trying not to say the whole bloody history of that backstory because it is hard and it is painful. And by the time those disciples we so often talk about get to Easter, they have experienced the sheer force of the one they love most in this world being violently ripped away from them. By the time the disciples get to Easter morning, these followers and friends of Jesus have been through things none of us should live to see. I was trying not to tell all of that to Malcolm, and yet it's true. As the scholars say, you can't get to Easter without going through Good Friday first. And Good Friday, the day of Jesus' suffering and execution at the hands of the mightiest empire on the face of the earth, it is not a pretty backstory at all. During the last week of his life, the peasant revolutionary friends of Jesus followed him on a journey from the safer places of their own communities in Galilee into the very gates of the empire that would destroy them. They followed him even though they knew they were rabble-rousers marching past armed guards and soldiers whose sole purpose that Passover season was to keep the peace. They followed him into the heart of danger because even up to the end, perhaps foolishly, they believed that he would somehow see both himself and all of them through it in the end. Even though he told them that he would probably die because of the risks he was taking, even then they believed him. They believed him about everything except that single truth, that this march they took together to Jerusalem would be their last. Even though they believed him about so much, they couldn't bring themselves to believe him about that. That the dream of a better way of living would really end that way, with that suffering. Even in those last days, they thought he'd somehow pull it out in the end. They thought it wouldn't get that far, until it did. On the day that we call Good Friday, this upstart messianic movement of Jesus followers well and truly lost their struggle. They lost. The empire won, or so it seemed for all the world. Everything they thought they believed was torn away from them, and the man they had followed into the center of the storm was, like so many people who tried to change the world before and after him, quite and completely dead. The story says that the curtain of the temple was torn as if the whole of Israel grieved, and the sun stopped shining in the sky. And for the followers of that peasant revolution started by this man, Joshua, the son of Joseph, the movement they thought they would follow to the very end of their days, even into the end of all days on earth, it was in likelihood over, this movement they had given themselves to. It died with the man. It was a trauma they did not know how to recover from. Perhaps they did not know if there was any such thing as recovery from such a loss. It was the end not just of a man, but of a life they believed in and of a hope for a new way. The backstory of Easter is a sweeping kind of grief. It is a pain so great that it buries us with it. It is a tomb from which we might all find it difficult to rise up. In the words of the poet Lewis Saunders, writing of Mary Magdalene, whom some versions of the story tells us was the first one to discover the empty tomb, he says about women none can know. There are some like this one whose pain is a locked sepulcher. Their pain buried in them, there is no fleeing from it, no casting it off. Deep calls to deep, a grave for a grave. 3 days was this one in the grave. In a world that died, in the cry in the afternoon, it is finished. This is a burying grief. This is a tearing away of hope. All of this is the backstory of the miracle. All of this, which is why I think it's so important for us to preach not only the backstory and not only the miracle itself, but the rest of the story, which even if we do not believe in literal miracles, has some lessons buried in it for us still. The rest of the story includes the Gospel of John, which offers us some incredibly compelling material, because in John I see myself, I see us in the disciples, I see this world as it bleeds and hopes and yearns for better days. I see myself in their loss and their confusion. I see familiar patterns of grief and response that I have seen in so many of us. In that version of the story, as John tells it, when the disciples suffer the immensity of this loss, they simply do not know what to do with it or what to do with themselves. The text says that the women, at least, had some idea of what one was to do. They went to tend the body at the tomb, to grieve in ancient ways given to them by their ancestors, to attend to those we've lost, to care for the body of the one whom they loved. But the story says that the guys, the team, the disciples themselves, the OG Jesus followers, the bros who were there from the beginning, the story says that they had no such tools for their own grief. It says instead that the followers of Jesus, the disciples themselves, having no form or function for their grief, simply went into retreat. You know these guys. Peter, Thomas, some Canaanite named Nathanael, and a few others. The Gospel of John says that after suffering the greatest loss of their lives and the humiliation of Jesus' death, they just go home to Galilee, back to their houses and their fishing boats. They had been fishermen, you see, before it all had happened. Before Jesus came along and convinced them to drop their nets and follow him, not just to Jerusalem at the end, but all around Galilee in what had been truly the adventure of their lifetimes. They had been fishermen, see, back before the beginning. And over those 3 years when they shared that journey, they shared so much. That public ministry that was not just his, but theirs. It held hunger and generosity, wonders and camaraderie, friendship and frustration. Just 3 years before his death, before their pain, he had found them in Galilee, his friends, He had met them as the simple fishermen that they once were. Together in those 3 years, they had transformed one another into preachers and troublemakers and friends. The long journey of their shared ministry, it had changed them, you see. It had changed them fully, from people just trying to get by into people trying together to build a whole new world. Their ministry together had transformed them. These men had been remade through their relationships and their shared labor and the hope kindled in their hearts, from fishermen getting by into leaders changing the world. Because of all that they had shared, they were more powerful than they ever could have imagined alone or before, in the days before they met him. And yet the moment he died, clouded by the trauma of his loss, the rest of the story of the Gospel of John says that these same transformed men who had shared so much with Jesus in the 3 years before his death just fled Jerusalem and ran as fast as they could to find their fishing boats again. In the midst of their sorrow, they tried to live as if none of it, not the transformation, not the dream of a better world, not the ministry, not the wonders and depredations that remade them holy, and most of all, not the suffering and death, that none of it had ever happened. As the theologian Kate Bowler has put it, the narrative of after is that you have to get back to before. And so they tried to hit rewind on the last 3 years of their lives. They tried to have a do-over, as if nothing had ever changed, as if they had been fishermen all along, as if the love and the power and the possibility that ultimately led to their sorrow had never been planted like a seed in their hearts in the first place, as if nothing had ever changed, wishing away even the great love which was, after all, the prerequisite for their great pain. And isn't that the way we sometimes grieve? By pretending even for a little while that none of it ever happened, the love or the loss. By trying, however impossibly, to just go back to the way things were before, because to face the way things are feels like more than we can handle. So in the Gospel of John, the rest of the story after the resurrection says that the disciples simply go back home to Galilee, and 3 days later, there they are in their fishing boats. Having fled the city, they are out in their boat, hiding from themselves, from their sorrow, and it is not going well, people. They're not catching anything. The hiding probably isn't working either, no matter how hard they try. There they are on their boats, catching nothing, when they look up into the breaking light of a new dawn and see someone familiar standing on the shore, silhouetted in sunshine. Cast your nets to the starboard side, the stranger on the beach says, and then you'll have some luck. And they do, pulling in a full catch, so many the net can't even bear it, so many fish they can't haul it in. Still, they do not know who is silhouetted on that beachfront, 100 feet from land. Once again, surprised, one of these men, these friends who have been through so much together, looks at Peter, the ostensible boss among them, and says with astonishment, "It is the Lord." And in a moment, with breaking recognition, Peter and Nathaniel and the guy from Canaan and all the rest, they jump out of their boat with all of their clothes still on and wade in to the shore. And that, my friends, is Easter. The moment of recognition, a joy so compelling you will jump out of whatever boat you are hiding in and wade to the shore still wearing all your clothes and keep on living even when you thought hiding out might be the only rational option in the face of a world this painful. And that is the rest of the story. Jesus returns to Galilee and reappears miraculously on the shoreline so that he can give his friends back their own own memories of all that they have shared, of all that they have hoped, so that he can give them back to themselves. Here is the resurrection that reminds us, even in grief, that we are still here, neither buried by that grief nor trapped in the forgetting of it, but transformed and becoming, emerging still into a new version of ourselves that only love can bring. Here is the resurrection in which it is not just Jesus who rises, but all of the people mired in their grieving who have forgotten who they are. Here is the resurrected Jesus who reminds his friends that they are not fishermen anymore, but fishers of men, people transformed by purpose to live a life greater than they would have imagined for themselves. As the Welsh Archbishop Rowan Williams once wrote, "Here is a Jesus who never belongs to the past in the sense that what he does or is over, complete, or sealed off. Instead, in these moments after the resurrection, Jesus is the holder of the people's own memories, their collective memory of who they became together in the life that they were lucky enough to share before all the dying began. And so in a final act of love, he gives them this memory back, this memory of who they really are, of who they have become together, the ways in which what they have shared has transformed them forever. He gives them back to themselves before apparently whisking himself away to heaven. He reminds his friends that they have been through something awful and something beautiful at the same time, and that the experience of it has changed them forever in a way that does not merely end with death, but opens the door for new life. It is the remembering who we are that leads on past all the suffering. It is the gift of our own memories returned. In William's words, growth is in the passionate constancy of returning to what seems a grave, a void, to the dim recollection of a possibility of love in the hope of hearing one's name spoken in that emptiness. These people you have become, the story tells us, are not canceled out by the grief or anxiety or the immensity of the change you feel now. These people you have become, by loving first and then by losing, are in fact who you are. Not fishermen, but fishers of men. And no one, not even an empire, and nothing, not even death, can take that away from you. And that, my friends, is the rest of the story. A risen Savior who gives his friends the gift of their own memories. A transformed reality in which death does not have the final word, and the way leads on, and everything we have known and felt and suffered and hoped together has transformed us into the people we are today. Having grieved, we too are invited to live. Easter is the possibility of love after loss, tossed out like a lifeline into whatever vessels we ourselves might be hiding out in, calling us to wade to shore with hearts full of wonder and begin right now the great commission of our own lives. Easter is a way that leads forward, the sacred work that is not yet finished, the path that has always led away from the empty tomb. Happy Easter, my friends. In this season, remember who you are. You are the beloved and precious children of everything that is sacred in this world and beyond it. And the goodness and mercy, the joy and the justice, the power and the possibility of this Easter tide are at loose in you and through you in the world. So when we are called to go from this place, as surely we all will be, let us go then, knowing who we already are, and carrying the blessing and the burden of this transformed self into the bright light of this new day on the other side of the resurrection. Amen, and blessed be. Indeed, we are only transformed when we transform each other. We are only given the beauty of this morning in this place because we make it so together. And there are so many people who have made that possible for us today. Starting with our tech team, we got Jeff and Danny and Ajay, and they made those slides work, didn't they? Thank you. Cliff and the choir and Shwai and all of the Easter egg hiders and hunters, and the children who came up and preached a whole sermon before the sermon ever started today. We are so blessed to be each other's people in those ways too. You can connect to the life of River Road in so many different ways. Get the e-weekly. You got all the scoop if you read there. For starters, we are collecting donations for our spring services auction, which will be open for bidding from May 5th to 19th. We'll have a special community event on that final day, and the auction team is actually going to be around today to answer any questions. Really, you can donate almost anything to the services auction. There are so many possibilities. Don't think you have nothing to give. There's plenty. The youth group is also hosting a pirate-themed murder mystery dinner this coming Saturday, April 6th at 6:30 p.m. You could perhaps wear pirate apparel. You could perhaps talk like a pirate. What you really need to do is buy a ticket and make sure you come. All the proceeds are going to go to feeding kids through To Be Well Fed, the charity house right here in our building. I hope it is very piratey indeed. If you know an organization that would be a good partner for our extending the offering giving, just let us know. We're accepting nominations right now, and they're going to close this coming week. So if you have any ideas for how we can take our generosity and extend it out beyond these doors, you can find out more by contacting Natalie Shaw or checking in the e-weekly. Also, big news. The all-congregation retreat is coming up in April, and registration opens right now. Isn't that right, Tom and Hugh? It opens right now. You can register. You can walk out of this. You could get your phone out and register right now. It is an extraordinary opportunity to gather together at Seneca Creek State Park for a whole weekend of programming and joy and nature and drumming and delight. And if you want to get to know some River Roaders, you cannot do better than the all-congregation retreat. So please register today. Also, Scotland AME Zion, our sister congregation who worships with us while their building is being rebuilt. They will be having their Easter service in high fashion here shortly after this service. So I will calmly and politely ask you to skedaddle and get to the fellowship hall as fast as you can so they can set up the drum kit and get their own party started. And finally, truly, this place and everything we do here, our work here, our care for one another, our care for the world is possible because you fund it. There is no other source for our ministry except the source of our love and care. And if indeed you have not pledged yet for our annual stewardship campaign, I want to ask you please to do so. It makes not only a difference, but all of the difference as we plan our life together in the coming year. Please pledge. There's a green button on the website. You can email me or Amanda or pretty much anybody else what a gift we have to offer one another when we take that care and share it more broadly. Thank you. I think the Easter egg hunters are done. And so, may this light we have kindled guide us in all that we do to help and not to hurt, to serve a spirit of freedom that helps our own souls be nurtured even as our generosity expands beyond our doors. May the truth that makes us free, the love that casts out fear, and the hope that never dies guide us and those we love and those we do not love forward together till the day spring breaks and all the shadows flee away. Amen.